Hi, it's Katrina. The Blue Bottle. An ordinary excavation being done in the city of Kingston upon Hull, or known locally as just Hull, turned a little bizarre. A team of archaeologists were digging up bodies in the old Trinity Cemetery when they came across one skeleton unlike the others. This strange skeleton was buried with a mysterious blue bottle sitting between its legs. The bottle contained a creepy, sludge-like liquid, puzzling the researchers and reporters who learned of the find. What was the weird blue bottle for? There was an inscription on the glass bottle that said Hull Infirmary. This suggests the bottle had been placed there on purpose by staff of the ancient infirmary. A little bit of research showed that the skeleton belonged to a woman who died sometime in her 60s after suffering from rickets and osteoporosis. But that still doesn't explain why such a creepy vial of liquid was placed between her legs. Archaeologists gave the bottle over to some scientists for testing. They discovered the presence of potassium, phosphorus, and sodium. In other words, this was quite possibly a bottle of urine. When this woman died, the workers at the infirmary placed the blue bottle, perhaps containing urine, between the legs to take to the afterlife. Or it could have also been a mysterious phosphate-based tonic used in the 19th century for curing ailments. Either way, it was strange. It was also exceptionally weird because out of the over 1,500 skeletons that were exhumed from the cemetery, she was the only one with such an artifact. A strange burial. On the small island of Chapelle-Domhue, located in the English Channel off the coast of Guernsey, archaeologists made a creepy discovery. An archaeological dig of just 3 weeks resulted in the unveiling of a dead porpoise. Researchers didn't find the tomb of a mysterious king or a warrior, but instead the elaborate grave of a medieval ocean mammal. Archaeologist Philip de Jersey from Oxford University told local news it was very peculiar. Even after digging up the porpoise, he and his colleagues had no idea what to think of it. Even now, they don't understand why the ancient islanders went through all the trouble of burying a porpoise. And it wasn't like they just buried it in the ground and forgot about it either. This animal wasn't disposed of like the dead family pet in the backyard. It was laid to rest in a proper Christian burial. While excavating, before they actually saw the body of the animal, the archaeologists thought they were digging up the remains of a medieval monk. Here's a bit of background on the island itself. It was used as a religious retreat for monks during the 14th century. Archaeologists have indeed found the tombs of monks on the island, and yet there is no way the porpoise was killed for food, as people didn't really tend to eat them back then. They have no good explanation for why the porpoise was buried with just as much care as a person. Why do you think that was? Let me know your theories in the comments. The girl with the finch in her mouth. In southern Poland, archaeologists were excavating a mysterious cave in 1967 when they came across the burial of a young girl. She died about 300 years ago. But what makes this confusing in itself is that people had generally stopped burying their dead in caves back in the Middle Ages. But even more unusual and shocking to the confused experts was the fact that she was discovered with the head of a finch in her mouth. Out of every skeleton ever found in Europe, this is the only one with the head of a bird stuffed into their mouth. There are no other examples of this anywhere. And to make things even creepier, the girl was only between the ages of 10 and 12 when she died. Researchers analyzed her bones, discovering signs of arrested growth. This means she may have suffered from a metabolic disease. But there is no evidence of trauma, no sign of stab wounds, and no obvious cause of death. Maybe she was poisoned. She may also have been strangled or suffocated. It's just too hard to say for sure. As for the bird head in the mouth, that's something nobody can even guess at. The experts are stumped and a little grossed out. Pickled fetus. A team of researchers from the University of Warsaw discovered the presence of an unborn child inside the belly of a female mummy. As if that wasn't strange enough, they discovered that the fetus had been pickled inside her abdomen for over 2,000 years. Because of the acidification as this woman decomposed, her baby was pickled and perfectly preserved. This is now the first mummy ever found embalmed with a fetus inside. She was removed from Egypt way back in December of 1826 and donated to the University of Warsaw. But it wasn't until recently that researchers were able to use CT scans and X-rays that they found the fetus. Otherwise, they would have had no idea it was there. Very little is known about the mummy herself. We don't know who she was or where she came from. Not even the location of her tomb is known. This was during the 1800s when she was taken, a time when foreign explorers were robbing Egyptian mummies left, right, and center. She likely came from a royal tomb in Thebes, probably buried in the 1st century BC. She was between 26 and 30 weeks into her pregnancy at the time of her death. Mysterious graves. About 1400 years ago in Europe, people practiced something very unusual. They developed a habit of reopening graves and removing things almost immediately after burial. Cemeteries throughout all of Europe, from Transylvania in the east to England in the west, have shown evidence of this strange behavior. Graves were opened and manipulated in what archaeologists initially mistook for grave robbing. But after analyzing a series of excavated cemeteries from 5 regions in Europe, they found it had nothing to do with grave robbing. Instead, the people who reopened the graves carefully selected which possessions they removed while leaving behind plenty of valuables. Researchers from Stockholm University say the most popular objects to be removed from graves were women's brooches and men's swords, but they would leave behind all kinds of precious metal objects like gold and silver jewelry. Most of the things taken from the graves were of no value, either practically or economically. Researchers are still struggling to figure out why this happened. The reopening of the graves probably had some kind of symbolic meaning, but it's difficult to say exactly what that symbolism was. One of the main theories is that people were taking back grave gifts that had been passed on as heirlooms, things that may not have been worth much, but connected family members. Like if you were buried with an old watch that had been in the family for centuries. Perhaps because of the sentimental value of these objects, they were removed and passed on to someone else in the family. Porridge Beer. A new study has identified a rather bizarre drink that Egyptian elites enjoyed 5,800 years ago. Researchers checked out fragments of pottery found at the ancient city of Hierakonpolis in southern Egypt. They found traces of beer, but this wasn't any ordinary beer. It was as thick as porridge and probably disgusting. The vessels they analyzed were used for transporting beer in bulk. They were enormous, made of fine clay, and reserved only for the elite members of society. Beer almost 6,000 years ago was not for everyone. It was a symbol of status and authority, but it was also pretty horrible. This beer was made primarily from wheat, barley, and grass. It had a very low alcohol content and was thick and cloudy like swamp scum. If you had the chance, would you taste this ancient Egyptian porridge beer? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. The Capuchin Crypt. The Capuchin Crypt in Czech Republic is one of the creepiest burial sites in the world. It's here where monks were mummified and interred over a period of 300 years, up until the 18th century. The crypt itself is located in the underbelly of Brno's Capuchin Church. The only way into the vault is by navigating a series of winding passageways deep in the dank underground. Once inside the crypt, the bodies of the monks can be seen lined against the walls, not stuffed in tombs or buried in coffins. They were simply laid out on the floor with their heads resting on bricks and their arms crossed across their chests. One of these mummies is a woman frozen in a horrifying pose. Archaeologists believe she was buried alive by accident because she suffered from paralysis, but the monks at the church didn't understand what it was. They put her in a coffin, she starved to death, and then they put her body in the crypt. What's really interesting is that the mummification wasn't even on purpose. The monks reused a single coffin for funerary rites. After the public funeral, the dead would be placed into the crypt, and the dry air helped preserve the bodies for hundreds of years. There are 24 monks down here still, clad in their robes and draped with rosaries. Ancient poisoning. 5,000-year-old bones have revealed the very first case of poisoning. These bones were discovered in Spain with alarmingly high levels of mercury. Researchers looked at the skeletal remains of over 370 individuals in the area who were alive during the Copper Age. This was between 2900 and 2600 BC. The high levels of mercury likely resulted from contact with cinnabar, a mercury sulfide mineral which forms in thermal and volcanic regions. When crushed, cinnabar turns into red powder, and this red powder was used for all kinds of things in the ancient world. Humans in the Copper Age used red pigment in paint, inhaled it as part of a hallucinogenic drug ritual, and accidentally poisoned themselves with it. These primitive humans obviously didn't know the dangers of mercury. We didn't even know about the dangers of lead until a few decades ago. Researchers think people who were inhaling the powder to get high, or people using it to make art, ended up dying as a result of it. Some people had 400 parts per million of mercury in their bones. According to the World Health Organization, the normal level of mercury should not exceed 1 or 2 parts per million. They probably had no idea what was happening, but they were suffering from mercury poisoning, a pretty miserable way to spend your final days. Spain may have seen a mass outbreak of mercury poisoning before they finally figured out it was the pigment that was causing it. Part of an ancient skull. In the Rising Star Cave, located in South Africa's Johannesburg, researchers discovered the partial skull of a child who died 250,000 years ago. The child wasn't quite human, but a member of the Homo naledi species. The team discovered only a fragment of her head, as well as a couple of teeth. At her time of death, the girl was only between 4 and 6 years old. The truly creepy part is the fact that she was found in a remote passage of the cave system, in a dark, gloomy pit of dirt and rock. Nobody even knows what happened to the rest of her bones, as researchers couldn't find anything except her skull fragments. It looks like the young girl wandered off on her own into the recesses of the cave and laid down on the dusty floor to perish. Professor Lee Berger, project leader, says she belonged to a very primitive species. She existed at the same time as more modern hominin species in Africa, yet there is little known of the Homo naledi. They appear to have been primarily cave dwellers. It's unclear when this species went extinct, how long they existed, or even how many there were. So many ancient ancestors of humans were wandering around Africa between 3 million and 10,000 years ago, it's almost impossible to keep track of each. Scientists are still working to figure out how all these ancient species interacted with one another and what caused each one to vanish, ultimately leading to the rise of humans. Chinese mummies. In northwest China, researchers discovered hundreds of mummified corpses buried in boats. This wasn't anywhere near the ocean, but in the middle of a barren desert. The burials began in 2000 BC in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The burials were done between 4100 and 3700 years ago and were discovered at the beginning of the 20th century. A total of 13 corpses, now known as the Tarim mummies. Because of where they were buried in the dry desert, the dead became mummified all on their own. When modern archaeologists found them, they still had their hair and clothing intact. It was a miraculous look into the past, at a distinct culture that lived in the desert. The structures that contained their remains were shaped like boats and covered in cowhides. They even used oars as grave markers. What's really strange is that this practice has only been seen before with the Vikings. And yet these were ancient North Eurasians, a group that spread into this part of China about 10,000 years ago, near the end of the Ice Age. The genetic lineage of these people can be directly connected to the indigenous population of North America and Siberia. While mummies are creepy and the people themselves were very mysterious, it's the fact that they were buried in boats that has archaeologists scratching their heads. They didn't live near water, they had no use for boats, and yet they used them in their burials. This was the last community in the world you would expect to do such a thing, and yet they did. Thanks for watching! Which of these weird archaeological discoveries creeped you out the most? Organicon. The Organicon epic is a myth of survival for the Turkish people. It's a story, or rather a collection of stories, that goes back thousands of years. The primary myth connected to the Organicon epic is one that tells the story of when the Turkish people were faced with extinction, and they escaped thanks to the help from a god in the form of a gray wolf. They escaped to a place detailed in the epic as a great valley in the mountains. Now, excavations in Kazakhstan have revealed what experts believe could be the actual location spoken of in the Organicon epic, suggesting the ancient story may have been based on something that actually happened, rather than a myth dreamed up and put in a book. Archaeologists began digging in 2012, with their first big discovery being the grave of a Turkish soldier. The man was buried with his horse, his weapons, and an immaculately preserved lute. Researchers also found the body of a Turkish poet, dating back to around the 6th century. But that's not even all they found. They continued to uncover iron tools, primitive stone shelters, and evidence of an old Turkish civilization. Professor Darhan Hidirali says all these things support the theory that this remote area of Kazakhstan could have been the actual location that the Turkish people fled to thousands of years ago. Shipwreck Treasure. Archaeologists in Israel have discovered the remains of 2 shipwrecks submerged at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. But what's truly fascinating is that these shipwrecks were discovered filled with sunken treasure from the days of the ancient Romans. The experts dug out hundreds and hundreds of medieval silver coins. They've already been dated to both the Roman and Mamluk periods, between 1700 and 600 years ago. Some of the Roman silver dates back to the 3rd century, while there are over 500 silver coins from later on in the Middle Ages, after the Roman Empire had already fallen. It's extremely rare that archaeologists actually find treasure in a sunken shipwreck. Normally, there's nothing left. The artifacts have decayed beyond recognition, or everything has been swept away by the ocean currents. But experts with the Israeli Antiquities Authority Marine Archaeology Unit spent 2 months conducting an underwater survey to make this discovery. And it was worth it, especially since they found more than just buried treasure. They also found old figurines, ceramics, and pieces of one of the ships itself, including nails and a broken iron anchor. The older Roman ship is believed to have originally come from Italy. The second ship is more of a mystery, since its medieval artifacts could have come from pretty much anywhere 600 years ago. International trade was already booming in Europe, so it's really hard to figure out the origin of the ship. Not much is left of it now, but some wet hunks of wood. Ancient rock drawings in Saudi Arabia. Ancient rock drawings across the country of Saudi Arabia have been getting a lot of attention in recent years. These rock drawings were found ages ago, but the scientific community has not conducted much research on them. This is despite the fact that they are considered important sources for understanding the ancient civilizations that lived in the Arabian Peninsula. Finally, now, archaeologists and historians have taken an interest in these drawings. One of the most fascinating examples can be found near the southern Saudi Arabian city of Najran. The drawing here shows 2 women, one of them covered in jewelry and the other dancing. It also shows a man holding 3 spears, 2 of them in his right hand and 1 in his left. These weapons symbolize power, while the woman dancing and the woman covered in jewelry may symbolize an ancient war dance. According to Professor of Ancient History Salma Hassawi, the rock drawing could represent a kind of sacred ritual. Even more, this rock drawing and others like it can be found all throughout Saudi Arabia, along what was once an ancient trade route. There are drawings of camels, lions, and wolves, battles between knights and hunters. Many of them date back to 7,000 years ago during the Paleolithic Age, and some of the newest date to just a few hundred years ago. Why do you think the drawings seem to run along a route? Tell me your theories in the comments below. Gravity-defying monument. Archaeologists have been left in shock by the discovery of a monument in the country of Myanmar that seems to defy gravity. It's called the Kaya Ik Tiyo Pagoda, or the Golden Rock, a popular Buddhist pilgrimage site. It can be found deep in the eastern Yoma Mountains, far from the eyes of any prying tourists. The pagoda is shrouded in the clouds, seeming to teeter precariously on the edge of a great abyss. It looks as though it should tumble over at any moment, and yet it never has. The local Buddhists believe the reason it keeps its balance is because of the Buddha's miraculous powers. Between the rock and the cliff that it's balanced on is said to be a strand of the Buddha's hair. The story goes back centuries. In Burmese myth, it's said that an ancient king encountered a Buddhist hermit who had been keeping a strand of Buddha's hair inside of his hat. The hermit offered the strand of hair to the king, suggesting that the king enshrined the hair in a new pagoda built on the edge of the cliff. The king then pulled a perfect rock from the bottom of the ocean, transported that to the top of the mountain, and balanced it at the edge, with the magical Buddha's hair keeping it from falling over. And it's stayed like that ever since. If you ask an archaeologist why the pagoda doesn't fall over, they'll say it's really just a stroke of luck. The truth is that we don't yet know how the pagoda was created, who managed to put the huge boulder on the edge of the mountain and paint it gold, or why it refuses to slide off. Either way, it's made the mountain one of the most famous spots in the entire country for Buddhist pilgrims from all over the world. The worst year in history. Science has proved that the years between 536 and 541 were the worst in human history. In fact, scientists agree that these years would make the last 2 years of the global pandemic look like a walk in the park. A series of volcanic eruptions sent clouds of ash into the atmosphere, which led to an unbelievable chain of catastrophic events. Perpetual darkness blocked out the sunlight, plunging global temperatures and resulting in massive crop failure across the world. But even as most of the people on Earth struggled just to survive, there was one Pueblo society that seemed to do extraordinarily well. The society, a prehistoric Native American civilization, was living in the southwest of the United States. Archaeologists recently took a closer look at their lives to find out just how they managed to flourish and become even more advanced while the rest of the world struggled to find food to eat. Researchers did this by using carbon dating, looking at ancient examples of food grains discovered from as far back as the year 500. What they uncovered was that the people living on the Colorado Plateau adapted in a way that no one else on the planet did. They began growing crops in a more scattered way, which helped to feed all of their people. They also saw a boom in the building of housing structures all the way until the end of the 6th century. It seems that the secret ingredient to their success was cooperation on a large scale. Most of the people during this time were isolated bands of farmers, but the Puebloans came together under the perpetual darkness to hunt, forage, and grow their food collectively. Working as a collective community ultimately led to their survival, while the rest of the world was falling apart. Ancient stone circle. Archaeologists believe they may have just discovered the original Stonehenge. A group of researchers from the University College London found a dismantled stone circle in Western Wales from 5,000 years ago. What's really amazing is that this disassembled stone circle was built extraordinarily close to the Blue Stone Quarry. For those who don't know, the Blue Stone Quarry was where the developers of Stonehenge got most of the original building blocks. They lugged them hundreds of miles across fields and forests to the site of Stonehenge. This actually happened centuries before the larger sarsen stones were brought from a much nearer distance of only 15 miles. But according to this new discovery, there was an original stone circle built beside the first quarry. The circle was about 361 feet in diameter, making it the third biggest great stone circle in Britain. But there wasn't much left when archaeologists found it. All they discovered were empty stone holes and 4 remaining pieces of rock badly decayed. Scientific dating of the sediments in the holes confirmed it was built around 3400 BC, or 400 years before the first stones were laid at Stonehenge. This original stone circle also appears to have been built to align with the midsummer solstice sunrise. The big question now is actually a two-parter. First, why did the ancient people who lived here disassemble the first stone circle? And second, why did they feel the need to bring the stones from the quarry so far just to build the second one centuries later? If you have any theories on this incredible new discovery, let me know in the comments below. Mayan figurine factory. Archaeologists in Guatemala have discovered the largest figurine workshop from the old Maya world. The workshop was buried for 1,000 years before it was finally recently uncovered in the jungles of Guatemala. Researchers from Winthrop University say the Mayan figurine factory mass-produced small statues to be sold all across the Maya kingdom. Sadly, the factory was in a terrible state of destruction when it was found. Archaeologists were only able to recover around 400 figurine fragments, as well as a lot of molds that were used for the mass production. It's believed the figurines made here played a major role in Mayan politics and the Mayan economy. Leaders may have given these figurines to their allies to help strengthen relationships. At the same time, trading the figurines from village to village would have promoted economic trade. The factory, discovered at an archaeological site called Aragon, was likely active between the years 750 and 900. It didn't shut down until near the very end of the 300-year-long collapse of the Maya Empire. Incredible new fossil site. It's true that the wasteland of Australia we call the outback isn't really the most ideal place to support life, but many years ago it was. The outback was a lush forest absolutely teeming with life. In fact, paleontologists recently found evidence that there was an abundance of creatures at an incredible new fossil site in New South Wales. Experts dug up the fossils of spiders, fish, insects, and birds dating back to between 11 and 16 million years ago during the Miocene era. Paleontologist Matthew McCurry says all these fossils prove that Central Australia was once a temperate rainforest bursting with thousands of different forms of life. Many of the creatures that have just been found at this fossil site are completely new to science. Researchers have discovered trapdoor spiders, giant cicada bugs, bizarre types of wasps, and a whole variety of fish that have never been seen before. The fossils also give a bit of insight into the future of the Australian continent. As you may already know, Australia still has a lot of lush rainforests, but 11 million years ago, the whole landmass was rainforest. As the temperature started to rise, the center began turning into a desert. As the temperature begins to rise again, it's looking like the rest of the forests on the continent could end up turning into wastelands as well. The giant space rock of doom. Archaeologists have discovered evidence that a giant space rock destroyed a medieval city in just seconds. It happened 3,600 years ago, when a giant hunk of icy space debris hit the Earth's atmosphere at a whopping 38,000 miles per hour. The residents of this city in the Middle East, a place now called Tal el Hammam, were probably going about their daily lives when the rock exploded 2.5 miles above the ground. The blast caused by this rock was over 1,000 times more explosive than the atomic bomb that the US dropped on Hiroshima. Here's what happened next. First, anyone who had been looking at the explosion was blinded instantly. Air temperatures then rose from what was probably a balmy 70-degree day to somewhere around 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Everyone and everything would have immediately burst into flames. Swords and bricks melted. The entire city was literally on fire in a second. A few seconds later, the shockwave came. It moved at about 740 miles per hour, with the wind ripping apart the city piece by piece. Roughly 60 seconds after that, residual winds from the blast hit the city of Jericho. The walls came tumbling down, and the city burned. Was this the inspiration for the biblical story of Sodom? Archaeologists know this actually happened because of over 15 years of excavations. They had to look through materials found in the old city to confirm their suspicion of a deadly space rock. After compiling all their data, scientists have no doubt that there really was a great meteorite of doom that destroyed the city, killed all 8,000 residents, and burned down ancient Jericho. A medieval wanderer. In 1985, the remains of a medieval Scotsman were found in the community of Blair Atholl. It happened during construction at someone's residence. The workers immediately stopped and called the police, thinking they had a crime scene on their hands. But as it turned out, the bones they found belonged to a man from around the year 400 AD. He became known as the Blair Atholl Man. Not much is known about this stranger even today. It was originally believed that he was part of the Pict civilization, an indigenous group who lived in eastern Scotland throughout medieval times. These guys were almost always in conflict with the Roman Empire as they tried pushing into their territory. It's believed the Picts even developed their own written language over 1,700 years ago. However, nobody has ever been able to find irrefutable proof of this. Also, recent studies of the stranger's DNA showed that he may have actually come from Western Scotland, moving across the country for an unknown reason and settling in the east. He may not have even been a local, but a wanderer, an original adventurer meandering about the country. Ancient Merv. Merv was once a major oasis city along the Silk Road in Central Asia. Today it's located in modern Turkmenistan. But throughout the years, many cultures have claimed Merv for both its riches and strategic value. The city originated in prehistory, with archaeological excavations revealing traces of life back to the 3rd millennium BC. Eventually, it became part of the Achaemenid Empire, and its name was changed to Margu. Later on, in the 6th century BC, Cyrus the Great of Persia changed the city's name to Merv. Going forward a few years, we get to the point where Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire and all of its lands. He allegedly visited Merv, and the locals changed its name to Alexandria for a brief period. But it was changed back, and then was ruled by the people of Seleucid, Bactria, Parthia, and the Kushans. It was basically a revolving door of different cultures coming in and out of the city. From about 220 to 553 AD, Merv became a religious hub for Zoroastrianism, Buddhists, and even Christians. It was a thriving metropolis filled with people from across the region, all practicing different religions in relative harmony. Then, between the 6th and 11th centuries, Merv was the seat of the East Syrian Empire. It was then converted to Islam, and Buddhism and other religions were banished. Eventually, its slow decline began. Now there is nothing left of this impressive city, or its thousands of years of habitation, except for some crumbling ruins in the desert. Although it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it's a far cry from what it once was, a thriving center of politics and culture that was briefly the largest city in the world. Gardar. Gardar is a mysterious ancient place in Greenland that was used as the seat of the bishop, who overlooked all the Norse settlements in this part of the world. A wealthy farmer in the area was the one who came up with the idea to have a separate bishop for Greenland in the beginning of the 12th century. The Norwegian king approved the idea, and he sent a bunch of clergymen over from Norway. A man by the name of Bishop Arnaldur took charge in 1126. That same year, he started the construction of a great cathedral devoted to St. Nicholas, the favored patron saint of sailors. There was a lot of stuff going on around this time with bishops. The newly established Archdiocese of Nidaros was spreading its influence throughout all the islands populated by the Norsemen. This included the Orkney Islands, the Isle of Man, the Faroe Islands, and Greenland. But all the religious influence began to slow down in the later part of the 1300s. By the early 1400s, the Greenland diocese had disappeared completely. The great cathedral built at Gardar by the church was abandoned and left in ruins. All that's there today is the settlement of Igaliku and the ruins of the bishop's church. Stone foundations, crumbling walls, and the remnants of 2 huge barns once used for storing cattle are the last vestiges of the period of the diocese's influence. The Chiang Bai Mountain Temple. At the foot of the Chiang Bai Mountain in China, there lie the ruins of a royal temple over 800 years old. It was established in the middle of what we call the Jin dynasty, between 1115 and 1234. That makes it the oldest temple ever used by the royal family on this mountain. The destroyed temple can be found in the ruins of the forsaken town of Baoma, just a few miles from the summit of the mountain. Here's why both of these places are important. The Chinese emperors of days past stayed at the town while they performed mountain worship ceremonies at the temple. These ceremonies were known as Fengchan in Chinese and involved the worship of the heavens and the earth. Every new emperor would go to the mountain and give praise at the highest peak. It was a way for them to pay homage to the heavens while receiving the blessing of the mountain. This gave legitimacy to the emperor for however many years they would rule. The most famous mountain where these types of ceremonies took place in China is Mount Tai. Nobody even excavated the ruins at Chiang Bai Mountain until 2013. No one had realized it was an archaeological site, as it was considered a scenic spot for weekend getaways by the locals. Now, archaeologists have found tablets detailing the emperors who visited the mountain to perform their rituals. However, almost all evidence of them is gone. The mountain hasn't been used in any royal capacity for centuries. Imagine learning some scenic picnic or vacation spot you visit was actually a wealth of archaeological knowledge. What would you do if you made this kind of discovery? Let us know in the comments below. Karahan Tepe. If you follow archaeology, you will no doubt have heard of one of the oldest and most mysterious sites in the world, Göbekli Tepe. But there is another place that we rarely hear about called Karahan Tepe. It's located near the border of Turkey and Syria. Karahan Tepe is a village about 11,400 years old, and it could very well change history. Archaeologists have excavated the remains of houses and huge monuments unlike anything else built at the time. It's amazing because the site is over 1,400 years older than the invention of agriculture. It demonstrates that human beings, particularly original hunter-gatherers, were migrating to permanent settlements much earlier than we ever thought. According to Necmi Karul from Istanbul University, the discoveries here are literally changing the perception of every schoolbook in the world. Life in a settlement didn't happen because of farming or animal husbandry. It happened separately, and agriculture came after. This is bizarre because the consensus until now was that agriculture caused humans to stop being nomadic. Now it appears that agriculture is actually the effect rather than the cause of settled life. People only figured out how to start growing crops once they started building towns. The final amazing thing about Karahan Tepe is that it's located less than 30 miles from Göbekli Tepe. The evidence suggests that domestication started here in Turkey over 6,000 years before the Druids of Britain started laying the stones for Stonehenge. Ancient Synagogue. Archaeologists working in Israel have discovered a synagogue from over 2,000 years ago in a large Jewish village along the Sea of Galilee. The village is called Migdal, and it was used in the First Jewish War as a rebel base. That was when the local Jewish population rose up against the might of Rome. This newest structure is the second synagogue found from the Roman period in the village. It's also the first example of two synagogues existing in a single locality from this time. This was back when the Second Temple of Jerusalem was still standing, before the Romans tore it down in 70 AD. Practicing Judaism wasn't really high on the priority list for the Romans. When they invaded what is today Israel, they tried their hardest to snuff out all the Judaism they could. It was one of the reasons the Jewish people fought back so hard against their oppressors and ultimately won. But what's interesting about this synagogue is that it shows just how important daily worship was, even under the thumb of Rome. The synagogue was found just a few hundred feet away from an earlier one discovered in 2009. Archaeologists with the Israel Antiquities Authority also uncovered old streets, a ruined marketplace, the remains of an industrial facility, and traditional Jewish baths. Superhenge. The remains of an almost impossibly giant stone monument have been found just 2 miles from Stonehenge in England. The monument, believe it or not, is over 15 times the overall size of Stonehenge. For this reason, British archaeologists have named it Superhenge. It's like the Stonehenge we all know and love, only on some major steroids. The monoliths that make up the monument were discovered buried underground. Researchers think they may have had something to do with Stonehenge and may have made up a Neolithic landscape unlike anything previously imagined. What this would mean is that Stonehenge wasn't alone, but was part of a much larger network of ceremonial plazas and ritual centers visited by people from all over. Sadly, the true mystery of this place is unsolved. Nobody knows when the stones were put in the ground or how they were used. They were demolished and buried a few thousand years ago, but it's unclear why. The stones may have been toppled by accident, or they may have been torn down on purpose. The only thing we know for sure is that 4,500 years ago, Stonehenge was not the only significant arrangement of rocks in a field. There were tons of these, many of which were significantly larger. And yet, despite the fact that archaeologists have found so many henges, they still know almost nothing about them. Why do you think the ancient people of Britain were so obsessed with building circles of stone? Let me know your theories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos coming up. Ancient Buddhist Temple. Italian archaeologists discovered the foundation of the oldest sacred Buddhist structure in Pakistan. It comes from the Mayan period in the 3rd century BC. About 100 years after the foundation was laid, the temple underwent major reconstruction. And then the Greeks arrived shortly after that, when Alexander the Great came conquering through the area. When King Menander came into power around 200 AD, he enhanced the temple and kept it functioning. It was used as a place of worship until the 4th century AD, when it was abruptly abandoned. At that time, it was in the Kushan city of Basira, and that city was destroyed by an earthquake. The temple, along with pretty much every other structure in the area, was demolished in a matter of seconds. Nobody ever rebuilt the temple, and so it was swallowed by the desert. Only now have modern researchers finally found this little piece of history. It's fascinating because it shows that Buddhists had a strong presence in this part of the world ever since the 3rd century. It also shows that the Indo-Greek rulers that came after Alexander supported Buddhism. For the few centuries that people worshipped at the temple, religious freedom was much more relaxed. People of different beliefs came and went, and people were much more tolerant. Some scholars believe this was a residual effect of Alexander's tolerance and multiculturalism, which was part of his vision for a more united world. Maya city of Koch. Researchers investigating the ancient Maya city of Koch have made some pretty interesting discoveries. This city once boasted a giant pyramid, as well as plenty of pieces of complex Maya architecture. And to make it even more interesting, the buildings and the pyramid, in fact the entire city, were built over a cave system. The cave system was key to helping the civilization survive. Recent mapping of the caves revealed a huge network of reservoirs and cisterns directly connected to the underground water table. This meant the community had an almost endless supply of fresh water, allowing them to thrive, and it also allowed them to experience a population boom. Exploration into the underground caves revealed many strange and wonderful things. Archaeologists found broken shards of pottery, artifacts from everyday life, and the charred remains of sacrificed victims. The insane number of bodies found in the caves indicates that it was a religious site where Mayans worshipped the rain gods. Nicholas Dunning, a professor from the University of Cincinnati, says the cave system beneath Koch was in continuous use from between 800 BC until the 19th century. It was also the biggest city in the region for centuries, only abandoned in 300 AD after their caves dried up and all the water was gone. Would you like to explore the caves beneath this ancient city? Let me know in the comments. The Chinese Mountain Pass. There is one spot along the Great Wall of China in the Shanxi province that is particularly interesting. It's a choke point between the mountains, used for centuries to block the nomads from the north, keeping them from invading. It's a strategic passage and arguably one of the best natural defensive positions anywhere in the world. This is the Janman Pass, and it's been witness to thousands of horrifyingly bloody battles ever since 476 BC. It was originally nicknamed Wild Goose Gate because the mountains that rise up to either side of the pass are too tall for birds to fly over. This meant no message could get from one side to the other. The only way to communicate with someone on the other side of the mountains was to go directly through the pass. When the Chinese figured out just how important this passage was around 2,500 years ago, they began building fortifications. They built a protective wall through the pass, then 3 more giant stone walls, along with 25 smaller walls as barriers. They essentially made this location one of unbreakable defenses. There were military camps here during the Ming Dynasty between 1368 to 1644. Lookout posts were erected, trenches, fortresses, and even beacon towers. This is still one of the best preserved parts of the Great Wall of China. A section of about 15,000 feet is still in near perfect condition, with its walls nearly 30 feet tall. The Plain of Jars. There is nowhere on Earth quite as mysterious as the Plain of Jars in northern Laos. The landscape here is littered with large gray sandstone structures that at first glance could be mistaken for abandoned wells. From above, they pockmark the area in clusters that sometimes resemble barnacles, but in fact, they are broken burial jars, many of them over 2,000 years old. The jars, seemingly discarded at random throughout a field, are made from sandstone. They are absolutely enormous. They were used by whichever ancient people lived here to bury their dead. A person's remains would be placed into the jar and exposed to the elements until nothing was left except their bones. Then the bones would be buried separately. Louise Shewan from the University of Melbourne says the jars had something to do with ancient rituals. They were used for a span of about 500 years before the practice abruptly ended. What's really strange is that who used them or where they went remains a mystery. There was an ancient tribe of people in the area who became obsessed with giant jars and the death rites of their deceased. Then, as quickly as they arrived, they left. When they abandoned the area, the evidence of their ritual burials remained behind. They also left behind almost no evidence of who they might have been. Archaeologists have found no nearby cities or other structures, and there's nothing here except hundreds and hundreds of huge jars, almost as if they fell from the sky. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite mysterious archaeological place in the world? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to hit that subscribe button and come back soon for more awesome videos. See you later! Bye!